Morgan and Paul met at university, where they studied together in the engineering faculty. Since then, they have been inseparable as twin brothers. They sat at the same desk, went for walks together, and even met girls together. They even looked alike, both blonde-haired, blue-eyed, medium height and strong build. True, Morgan had a more strong-willed character, but he never bragged about it. Paul, on the other hand, was more sentimental and emotional, but he always controlled himself. Paul did his best to appear a strong and tough man, and only Morgan knew that in fact his character was very soft. But despite their different temperaments, the friends always had a lot of fun together. It was a wonderful time, filled with interesting events and dreams about the future. At that time, the men were passionate about science and dreamed of a career of great scientists. They studied well, and the professors always praised the two capable students. But after graduating, the two people seriously think about what choice they should make, to continue to do science and all their life to work for the man, or to go into their own business. Finally, after weighing everything, the men preferred the second option and have never regretted it. Finding a promising niche related to information technology, they achieved spectacular success in just a couple of years and became major entrepreneurs, owning the company with over 500 employees. Yes, they sacrificed science for financial prosperity and independence, but they were glad they chose that path. Of course, at first, it was not easy for them. They had to take out loans and work without sleep or rest, but over time these efforts began to pay off. At the same time, there were no disagreements between friends and now partners. They understood each other perfectly, and it was unacceptable to quarrel over money. Not only did they work together, but they lived in houses next door, so they saw each other almost every day. Their lives were so synchronized that they met their fiancés at the same time. Once they entered a cafe near the office and saw two young women. Paul was immediately attracted to Clara and Morgan to Audrey. The young people got to know each other, exchanged phone numbers, and within a year the men were thinking about getting married. And they were going to celebrate it on the same day. Maybe it would have happened that way, but this beautiful story ended dramatically. One day, Paul and Morgan, along with their girlfriends, drove out of the city for a picnic. Everyone was anticipating a great day, laughing a lot and enjoying the ride. Paul was driving the car, and Clara was sitting next to him. Suddenly, a truck with the sleeping driver drove into the oncoming lane, and in a matter of moments there was a horrible accident. Clara was dead on the spot, while Paul was trapped in the cabin. As a result, his spine was severely injured. When rescuers arrived, Morgan watched in horror as they dragged the bleeding Paul out of the car and prayed that he would survive. Paul regained consciousness at the hospital and unwittingly overheard the doctors discussing Clara's death. At first, he did not even understand what they were talking about. Thoughts were mixed up in his head and he fell back into a heavy sleep. When he woke up the second time, the doctors, after giving him a sedative, told him that his passenger had died. The man's heart nearly broke from pain and horror. The nurses stroked his arm and urged him to calm down. But is it possible to calm down when the soul hurts and turns inside out from only one thought that the beloved is dead? Paul cried for a long time and even tried to get up, but his legs did not obey. If it were not for that, he would have definitely said goodbye to this life to end this unbearable pain of losing his loved one. Paul fell into a deep depression. He often refused to eat and spent the whole day lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. He was no longer interested in his health. He refused treatment because life without Clara had no meaning anymore. 6 months later, the man was discharged from the hospital in a wheelchair. Morgan took him home and began to look after him, but Paul did not care anymore. He did not see any reason to live, even though the doctors tried to convince him that he had a good chance for recovery. He needed one more surgery and a subsequent recovery, a course of chiropractic and physical therapy, but Paul was too depressed to do anything. He would literally lock himself in his room, pull down the curtains, and lie quietly on the bed. Sometimes he would agree to eat something, but only to avoid dying from starvation. As time passed, Paul began to leave his room from time to time, but he still craved loneliness, did not communicate with anyone, and spent all his days in heavy thoughts about his dead fiancée. Morgan tried to help his friend. He hired the best nurses for him, but none of them stayed long because of Paul's obnoxious character. He lived only in the past, did not want to accept the present, and did not see the future. A year went by, but things only got worse in Paul's life. He completely lost his spirits, stopped shaving and taking care of himself. He looked like a bum, and he became even addicted to alcohol. Often in his alcoholic binge, he became more talkative, but it was only to complain to a friend about his life. "Who needs me like this now? Why did they save me? I should have died there on the highway with her." And Paul continued to degrade day after day, not trying to change anything in his life, although he had plenty of opportunities. Morgan was agonizingly searching for a way to get his friend out of the depression, and one day he came up with the idea of entertaining Paul a little so that he could forget about his loss, at least for a while. He decided to find a girl who would agree to flirt with a disabled man for money and play the role of a woman in love. He placed an ad for a job in the local newspaper. Almost all the women answering the job refused, considering it immoral and low, and only one accepted. Her name was Violet. She had recently been released on parole after several years of imprisonment on false charges. Previously, Violet had worked as an accountant for a trading company and had become a victim of her dishonest bosses. To hide the money they stole, Violet was framed and accused of financial fraud, and she could not prove anything. She had a son who was immediately sent to an orphanage, as Violet was raising him alone. After returning from prison, Violet, temporarily deprived of parental rights, badly needed money to return her son, but no one wanted to take the ex-convict to work. The woman agreed to any part-time job she could find, and suddenly came across this unusual ad. Learning the details, she agreed. Morgan had thought of everything in advance. He told Paul that he had created an account for him on a dating website. Paul was angry at his friend and asked to delete it, but after a few days his curiosity kicked in. It was there that he met Violet, who managed to interest him. Soon they agreed to meet. When Paul saw Violet, he realized that he really liked her, and even his heart in his chest, hungry for feelings, was beating harder for the first time. For the first time in a long time, he felt like a young man, not decrepit old man that he had imagined himself to be. After a month of dating, Paul invited Violet to come and live with him, and she immediately agreed. He fell in love with this woman unnoticed, and Violet felt that from a certain moment she became interested in Paul, not in his money and this silly job. She got to know Paul as a person and realized that they were just made for each other. Soon the young people decided to get married, but Morgan decided that this game had gone too far. He realized that his attempt to entertain his friend might have ended in an irreparable mistake and revealed the whole truth to Paul. After hearing everything, Paul sat motionless for a long time, and then he became enraged. He kicked the former prisoner out of his house without even talking to her. He could not believe that this woman, who had looked into his eyes so sincerely and lovingly, had actually been blatantly lying to him all this time. The man fell into depression again. He suffered like this for a month. He thought a lot and finally realized that he could not live without Violet. Deep down, he hoped that she had not been pretending and really loved him. After dealing with his resentment, Paul called Violet and apologized for everything he had done and asked her to return. But this time, the woman made a condition. "I'll come back if you promise to pull yourself together and agree to the operation. You can't go on living like this. I need a strong man, not one who lives in the past and feels sorry for himself." Paul felt an electric shock after these words. For Violet's sake, he was ready for any challenge. So he immediately went for a consultation with a doctor and started treatment. A couple of months later, he went abroad, where he had a successful surgery. All this time, Violet was with him and supported Paul, trying to do everything to make beloved recover faster. Eventually, the treatment had an excellent result, and Paul became a fully healthy person again. When he returned home, he proposed to Violet, and she agreed with pleasure. They took Violet's son from the orphanage and began to live together in peace and harmony. Soon, Violet gave birth to a daughter who was named Nina. The man was finally happy and calm and thanked Morgan from the bottom of his heart for not giving up and helping him, even despite all his rejections.